Mario Shen wrote a really awesome piece this morning talking about how decentralized finance token prices have increased in the short term due to China's recent ban, but that's not likely to hold as Chinese regulators continue to push down on the cryptocurrency industry in general in that region. So, of course, as we talked about earlier this week, we saw that 2 Ethereum mining pools decided to close up shop entirely just to get a business out of China because they don't want to face regulatory pressure. We've also seen Huobi start to move a lot of its presence out of China. They started doing that as far back as 2017, but they even moved more aggressively after June's edicts from the central bank and other parties within China to shut down cryptocurrencies industries across the board. So Moya was looking at how decentralized finance, which of course doesn't really have any of the negative externalities of traditional finance, right? You have censorship-resistant platforms. You can take a loan out. Nobody's on the other side of that except for another peer who doesn't know who you are. So you have a lot of benefits with DeFi. But how is DeFi going to interact with China's recent bans? Of course, prices is one way to kind of look at that and say like, oh, we're in the green now, so maybe DeFi is going to weather this storm. But talking with a lot of people on the DeFi front in China, she noted that most teams are choosing to leave the area rather than kind of work through these current burdens. Why? Just because it's just too cloudy out. The things don't look good for them going forward. Zach, what was your kind of take on this story? I thought from a macro perspective, it was really interesting. It's also pretty frustrating from if you're like in the weeds of DeFi, just to see teams out of China facing so much political pressure so early on.
Yeah, I like the kicker of this piece, just the idea of minimizing platform risk and how DeFi provides a bit of that, right? If you're a decentralized exchange, there's still likely a throat to choke, to borrow that image from Consensus 2021. There's still likely a throat to choke, but it's much more difficult to choke that throat than it would be at a centralized exchange operator. So I think what we're seeing here is, again, this escape to decentralization, and that's what DeFi really represents in the context of a China crackdown and potentially future crackdowns ahead, right? I think the tech industry is sort of seeing the writing on the wall that, okay, well, if we can sort of establish these structures in a more quote unquote decentralized fashion, it becomes much harder to stifle them from regulators on the warpath. And so I think that's what I'd imagine some of these investors pumping themselves into DeFi coins right now are seeing, or at least, that's their thesis right now. Hey, I'd rather invest in Uniswap than in Coinbase stock right now, because I think that's a platform that may be positioned to ride out the storm better than its centralized counterparts. Now, that's still, again, that's an open question right now, but I think that's what people are sort of betting on as they look at ways that are in response to, again, these regulatory crackdowns, and saying, oh, okay, well, a decentralized exchange, that's something that will last, rather than something that can be snuffed out by state regulators. So interesting to see. I'm curious to see if that actually plays out, or we'll just see sort of the BitMEX playbook get played out again on Uniswap Labs and the people behind DYDX, because they're human beings who at some level here started up these platforms that are running autonomously on the internet. But it doesn't mean that the long arm of the law won't necessarily find those human beings and hold them to account. So open question, but certainly promising. Naomi, what's your thought?
Yeah. I completely agree, Zach. And I think that's the most terrifying thing in the future, is if the government starts to go after these developers who are leading projects. I think that if you were really thinking down the road, you might have started your developer career as an anonymous person, but we've already talked about the trade-offs of that. It's a lot harder without an actual person and reputation behind you to get people to trust your product. Sure, you can put the code out there, but actually getting traction and getting people to know who you are, like it's a lot easier for people to just leverage an existing reputation than to build one from scratch from an anonymous position. That being said, they may pay the price for that. But in the United States, there have been battles about whether or not code is free speech. And it's been said that, yes, code is a form of speech. So to the extent that they will be able to go after people, I'm not sure. This is probably something that's going to be battled fiercely in courts. And we can kind of expect that as the next battleground. But even if it turns out that, yes, code is speech and they can write whatever they want, there may be technical implementations of that, like how is the code used? Are they like creating servers? Are they creating packages that actually tools that people download? Like, I mean, if we've seen how the US government has handled the Assange case and the fact that they have changed the definition of a journalist to an information broker, because journalists are protected under freedom of the press here, but information brokers are not. Like, if that's the kind of low level that they're sinking to when they're trying to persecute people they don't like, I think anything is possible when they're starting to go after devs. And so I do worry about that future. When we're talking about China, I mean, DeFi is the option for them, right? I mean, we talk about how the government's cracked down on this, and so maybe DeFi isn't going to boom there because it's going to be shut down. Like, DeFi is the only option when the government is cracking down. This stuff doesn't disappear when governments crack down. Look at prohibition. Look at the war on drugs. It doesn't disappear. Everyone goes to online, dark markets that sell drugs, and these things didn't shut down. They even shut down centralized ones like Silk Road, and 12 within the next week immediately popped up. So this stuff doesn't disappear, and this becomes a lifeline for people who have no other way of getting access to these financial tools. And getting access to financial tools is a top priority for Chinese people right now, trying to get their money into a safer place than within a state bank, than within something inside China itself, where there's just such terrible authoritarian policies. But Will, I saw your hand go up, so I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, just to turn the focus back to China here, I think it's interesting that a lot of these developer teams are choosing to move to Singapore instead of sticking around in China. There's some other great reporting on Huobi on CoinDesk. I think forget who the author is, but I definitely go read that if you have a moment today. Just talking about how Huobi has had to make a lot of decisions about their team in general, like where are they going to live? Is it going to be upper level staff living in China, or is it going to be lower level staff in China? Are their staff safe to continue living in those regions? Can they kind of operate as like a side business or a subsidiary? And for the most part, Huobi has decided that no, they can't. So my concern is, if you look at the startups or if you look at the larger businesses and say like they don't feel safe there, then why should a consumer of that product also feel safe there? And decentralized finance is an option, but at the same time, we know it's not, because you need to have a VPN. You need to know how to protect your addresses. You need to make sure that the coins that you're holding don't tie back to anybody in particular. For example, what if USDC was being used in China and the CCP had some pressure against the US government, or had some pressure against US companies to kind of force that USDC not to work within the region? So there's a lot of different bottlenecks that come into play here. And my take in general is just very bearish on this. It's frustrating to see, but I think it is just it's just the reality of the situation in my mind's eye. But I'll leave my thoughts there.
I want to just add to that a little more positive note. Like, this is literally why cryptocurrency was created. We did not ever in the history of talking about this expect that this stuff would come into existence and governments would be like, this is cool. Everyone go ahead, go explore it. Like, this was always a tool to take back financial sovereignty against an adversary, against someone who is fighting to stop us take back that control. So this was never an unexpected play. Governments are continuing to crack down. More governments are going to continue to crack down. Maybe the US government is even going to crack down. The point is, it doesn't matter, because yes, they can. It's going to be hard. It's going to be a hard battle. Let's not pretend that DeFi is this wonderful magic pill that we all swallow and everything works great, right? This is a hard battle for people who want to reclaim their freedom, but the fact is it can't be shut down. It is decentralized. And so we have never experienced this before in the history of alternative money or alternative financial systems. They've always had focal points for governments to shut down. For the first time ever, Bitcoin, had this incredibly innovative system where there was no central focal point, where it was completely permissionless, where there was nothing for, no one for the government to throw in jail. Even if they throw Satoshi in jail, it doesn't stop Bitcoin. So yes, it is sad, and it's going to be hard, especially for people in China where the government's very aggressive right now, but this is exactly what these permissionless systems are for. Let's see them work. Let's see the solutions that they give to people who otherwise would have had no alternatives. And I think it's going to be very promising.